Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our next edition of the Enterprise Big Data Framework webinar series. And today we have a very interesting topic for you because we're going to be talking and diving deeper into data management and specifically around data management processes. But before I do that, let me explain a little bit around the logistics of this webinar. First of all, note that everyone has been placed in listen-only mode, so you won't have the ability to speak during this webinar. However, that does not mean that you cannot ask questions or interact with our speaker for today. On the left-hand side of your screen, you will see a chat function and Q&A box. If you have any questions for our speaker, I kindly request you to put the questions in the Q&A box so that I can moderate them at the end. During the presentation, we will refrain from asking questions and we will centralize questions towards the end of the whole webinar. So other people can also see which questions you put in. So in case you find a question very interesting, please use the upvote functionality to prioritize all of the different questions. Other than that, note that this webinar is being recorded and that we will make the recording available on our platforms on the Enterprise Big Data Framework website, as well as on our YouTube channel. So in case you missed something or would like to watch back a particular section, that will be available around 1 day after this webinar ended. Good, so that's all the logistics for this session. Let me provide a quick introduction towards the Enterprise Big Data Framework. This webinar is presented to you by the Enterprise Big Data Framework Alliance, and we are an independent body of knowledge for the development and advancement of big data best practices. Through certifications, learning, conferences, and knowledge sharing sessions like this one, we are advocating and educating around the way in which organizations and people can use data in better ways. In order to establish this in a structural manner, we've set up a vendor-neutral program for big data education and certification services. And on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see some of our most popular certifications, which Kineteek is also all offering, as we will learn at the end of this session. In case you're interested in learning more about the Big Data Framework Alliance or joining as a member, I highly encourage you to check out the website after you have completed the session today. Good, I've let you all wait long enough. It's my great pleasure to introduce to you Babalo Mpunga, who is the Director and Principal BI Consultant at Kineteek Technologies. And as all of you know, Kineteek is one of the partners of the Enterprise Big Data Framework Alliance to provide education and training services around big data. Babalo, it's an absolute pleasure to speak to you again. This is not the first time. And I'm sincerely excited to listen to you today around data management processes. Welcome to this webinar series, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jan Willem, for the warm welcome. I'm glad to be here, and I'd also like to thank all of the people who are attending today. So without wasting any more time, let's just get into it. So I'm just going to start by giving a brief overview of our itinerary for the day. So we're going to start with data management overview, just touching on key concepts and processes that are key in the data management space. And then following that, we will dive then into the data management processes, looking at fundamental processes and looking at best practices. So let's get to our facts section. So I would like to start with some opening thoughts. Over the weekend, I was reading a book by Arts Principle by Arthur Gensler. And in a chapter that's titled Resilience, he had a quote that he shared. Getting it wrong is part of getting it right. This got me thinking about data management. Uses of data involve learning from it, applying that learning and creating value. And therefore, data management is fundamentally a learning process. The data management process inherits a lot of complexity from an advancing society and ever-changing business practices, and therefore it has to be fluid. And therein lies the complexity of managing data. So getting it wrong will be part of the process of getting it right. Now, the goal of data management is to get value from data assets. It is not perfection. And therefore, the focus should be on continuous improvement as you work through these challenges, and also trying to work to achieve the best possible outcomes within available resources and constraints. I thought to share this to give a bit of a backdrop and context before we get into our presentation today. Now we're going to move over now to our following topic area, which is going to look at big data processes. The enterprise big data framework identifies three foundational big data processes, which is data governance, data management, and data analysis. High quality data is at the heart of all these three processes. Now, how do they actually work together? So let me give you a helicopter view. The data governance process is ultimately accountable for defining and creating the data quality strategy, while the data management process is responsible for implementing and administering controls over the data according to the data quality strategy through its various processes, which we'll touch on later on in the session today. It is essential to have data that meets the required quality for the data analysis process to be successful. As we mentioned before, the primary driver for data management is to enable organizations to get value from their data assets. Today, we'll be focusing on data management processes. This is just giving a bit of a context on the other processes that coexist and work with the data management process. And to understand this process, you need to understand the data life cycle, which is going to be the topic of our next slide. Managing data involves a series of interconnected processes aligned with the data life cycle. Now, the data life cycle is mostly known through its stages, right? Which are ultimately to create, to store, to use, to maintain, to archive, and ultimately delete data. The data life cycle management capability is often one that is overlooked. It involves 5 processes: creation and acquisition, process and analyzing data, storage and retention, sharing and disseminating data, and ultimately archival and disposal. This capability deals with the enterprise data flows from creation to retirement. The primary focus is on efficiency due to the element of time that is always involved from when data enters a system to when it is utilized and ultimately disposed if required. Now, on the other hand, what we have is the data management process. Its primary focus is on data quality. However, it serves several processes as well, like ensuring data security, safeguarding the privacy of individuals' data, optimizing the environment and making sure that it's highly performant to be able to meet all the requirements, and ultimately enabling collaboration among the organization and people and connecting departments together, and ultimately supporting the data analysis process. Now, data types have different life cycle characteristics. In our next slide, we're going to look at 3 use cases that will further explain this a bit further. First example, which will show that the sequential flow that you see as depicted in the previous slide is not necessarily cast in stone. The sequential flow or the flow of the data life cycle would depend on different use cases. The first example that we see here is the traditional paradigm, or what is called mostly BI, which follows an ETL data pattern, which is basically an extract, transform, and load. This is quite common in relational data warehouses, which operate on schema on write design techniques like dimensional modeling. Our second use case that we're going to look at is the big data volume use case. which follows a different pattern, right? Which is extract, load, and transform. This is typical of data lakes, having a schema on read techniques. As far as architecture is concerned, I think an example that I can put forward is that of the modern data architecture, which basically uses a file system for staging data. It could be, for example, Hadoop. And this is where you would have discovery and exploration use cases, especially for data science. And additionally, it will have a relational data warehouse, which is where you'll have more formatted and transformed data, which would fit a more structured type of data. And this is usually used for enterprise reporting. The third one that we're going to look at is big data velocity use case. Right? Now, this is mostly common in real-time streaming. As an example, if you look at fraud detection systems in the financial sector or real-time recommendation systems in retail. From an architectural perspective, what you would find here is the two architectures that are quite popular is the Lambda and the Kappa architectures, which both cater for batch and real-time streaming pipelines, but have just got different approaches to get to that. Now, for this reason, there are different management requirements for the different types of data that we have. And therefore, the data management practice has to recognize these differences and be flexible enough to meet the different kinds of data lifecycle requirements. On our next topic area, I'm going to look at an interesting topic, or at least I find it interesting, and that is data management principles. So what are principles ultimately, right? Principles are fundamental truths, guidelines, or rules that are foundational to a particular concept, system, or practice. Right? What they ultimately do is that they guide behavior and decision making. Now, in the context of data management, I'm going to share an example that I got from DAMA, where it looks at data management principles, which are going to be foundational guidelines for effectively managing data within an organization. Right? These principles establish a framework for data governance, quality, security, and usability. So I'm just going to look at a few in turn. So these are basically broken up into 5 themes, which is data is valuable, and effective data management requires leadership commitment. I think this one is very important. Due to the complexity of data management, a lot of collaboration is going to be required, and a lot of working across departments is going to be required. And this is not going to need just management skills. This is going to need leadership to assist in driving that vision. Data is valuable, and I think we've heard this quite a number of times, and data is an asset. But what we also need to understand is that it is an asset, but it also has unique properties. For example, data is intangible. And unlike financial assets, as an example, when you consume it, it is still there, right? It takes metadata to manage data. Metadata is the data that is used to manage and use data. Data cannot be held or touched, so to understand it, we need a definition of what it is in the form of metadata, right? What is also going to be important here that I also want to highlight is that data management requirements need an enterprise perspective. Yes, they can have local applications, but it must be applied across the enterprise to be effective as possible. And data accounts for a range of perspectives. Data is fluid, as we mentioned previously, and it will be constantly evolving to keep up with the ways in which it is created, in the way that it is used and consumed, and who is actually consuming it. Now, it is important to actually have principles to guide actions. And what they do is that in every moment when the data management practice is going about its day-to-day activities, these will help as a guide as to how to approach data and how to understand the data management process. Now, what we're going to look at now in our next section is we're going to look at the data management processes themselves. And where we're going to start by exploring the fundamental processes that define data management. Data management does not consist of a single process. It is a collection of data management processes that together ensure that an organization has control over its enterprise data and can safeguard its quality. The Enterprise Data Framework Alliance identifies 9 of these mini processes that make up the data management process. And ultimately, of course, these will support the purposes that were outlined previously. So I'm just going to go and touch on each of them in turn, just to give a bit explanation of what they cover. When we talk about data accessibility, right, we're talking about the ability of authorized personnel within an organization to access data easily and efficiently. Right, this is key and very important. And each and every data management function should be able to provide this accessibility. Now, the one we're going to look at in turn now is data auditability, which refers to the ability to track and monitor changes made to data over time. This becomes key in matters related to compliance and regulation. The third one, data integrity, which is a container term that refers to accuracy, consistency, and reliability. Data is considered to have integrity when it can be relied upon to make decisions and support critical processes in the business. Data availability talks about the ability of an organization to access and use data when it is needed. This means now minimizing disruptions and failure and making sure that data systems are constantly available for the people who require them. Data confidentiality is the practice of ensuring that sensitive data is kept private and is only accessed by people and systems that are authorized. It is quite broad in that confidential data can include personally identifying data. It could include financial data. It could include intellectual property, trade secrets, etc. And this is where it differs to a certain extent to data privacy, which has a specific focus, which is the protection of an individual's personal information. Data privacy is the right of an individual to keep their personal information private and to control how it is collected, used, and shared. The mini process, which is data accuracy, is a measure of how closely a piece of data reflects reality. It refers to the degree to which the data is free from errors, inconsistencies, and mistakes. Consistency, on the other hand, is how data is uniform across all the systems that are available in the organization, ensuring that whatever data element I see in one area of the organization is consistent with one that I see in another one. And last but not least, the most involved process is data security, which is the protection of digital information from unauthorized access, theft, damage, or corruption. These processes come together, and what they do is, as a collection, they support the data management process in its endeavor to make sure that data quality, security, privacy, optimization, and ultimately supporting the data analysis process where we tap into the data assets of the organization and try to provide value. Now, when we think about the stages of the life cycle, I think the first one there is the creation. So we're going to look now at data collection and entry, look at best practices. Won't be exhaustive, but we'll give a general idea of the best practice that can be followed. So creation and usage are probably the most critical points in the data life cycle. It is important to understand how data is produced, are obtained, as well as how it is used. This understanding highlights the importance of careful data entry and collection practices, as they form the foundation of the entire data ecosystem. As you will know, the old adage called GIGO shortly, or garbage in, garbage out, which basically emphasizes the quality of insights are only as good as the quality of data that they were based on. So it is crucial, therefore, to ensure the accuracy and completeness and relevance of data during the entry and collection process. Effective data entry protocols not only prevent erroneous or incomplete data from polluting the data set, but they also help in building integrity from the outset. Let us now just look at a few practices that we can look at. Standardized data entry processes. There are many techniques that can be utilized to ensure that. For instance, validation rules can be utilized, input masks. These make sure that corrupt data does not enter the system, and drop-down lists. It's essential to actually establish this process and establish procedures to make sure that data is validated before it actually enters the system. What is also going to be key and important is data entry, training, and guideline. This will help to make sure that the personnel in the organization understand the importance of accurate data, and they are well trained as well in the procedures to enter data into the ecosystem. With that in mind, you're also going to have continuous checks and monitoring, and it's an ongoing process. But to make sure that you do this effectively, it is recommended to use software, so data validation software that will assist you with that. You're always going to have to regularly do data cleaning. Make sure that you have a reporting structure set in place to report on data entry validations, and you have to continuously review the process to make sure that at every given point in time, it is doing what is expected to do. There will be errors that will be picked up, that will slip into the system, and for that, you need an error handling and correction process to make sure that errors that are picked up are corrected, and when they are corrected, the relevant stakeholders are notified. Unique identifiers is also a key practice, and it is crucial for maintaining the integrity and consistency of data and preventing confusion. There are many ways to implement uniqueness of data. It can be implemented on the storage side. When data enters, it is assigned a unique identifier, which will always be consistent throughout its journey. And then, of course, again, metadata. Metadata is quite important because it will help us in tracing the origins of the issues that we have and understanding the data element that we're looking at by having its definition, understanding where it came from, how it was created, etc. So these are a number of practices that can be put in place. They are by no means exhaustive, but they will assist in making sure that when you enter and collect data, it has integrity from the outset. Now we're going to switch over now and look at the second stage, which relates to storage, and look at the processes that you can put in place there and techniques to make sure that those are functioning optimally. And I think data architecture design is central to it. A data architecture ultimately is there to plan and to decide how you're going to store your data, how you're going to organize it, how is it going to be accessed. You decide on the type of databases you're going to use, depending on the type of data you're looking at and the use cases that you have. It is the central driver as far as making sure that the data can be stored efficiently. With that, there are a number of other practices that you can actually also look at, depending on the type of data you're working with. Database design. A well-designed database will optimize storage and retrieval. So you have to make sure that from the onset, you follow proper database design practices, depending on the database that you're actually building and for what use case it is for. One of those would be data normalization as an example, if you're working with relational databases, to ensure that you don't have update and delete anomalies when you're working with the data. Now, also designing the logical layer through data modeling is going to be a key technique that you're going to utilize, right? And therefore, you have to make sure that when you're modeling your data, you model it in a way that will protect the integrity of your data, make sure that it's easily accessible, and understanding what use case you have, right? Backup and recovery planning is also key to make sure that if ever there's a situation where data is lost, you have a way to actually retrieve it. Now, there are many techniques, there are many practices, just touching on a few there that can actually assist with the storage process. What we're going to look at next is processes that are involved in the retrieval of data. Right? Data normalization is one that comes top of mind when you are looking now, not just to store data efficiently, but now you're looking to read it efficiently. And so what mostly happens is that there's an introduction of redundancy. However, this redundancy needs to be controlled and it has to be known. Otherwise, if not, then it will impact on the integrity and the quality of the data. Query optimization techniques, this is part of database administration as a process and as a function where you're consistently optimizing queries based on the use cases that you're using. So the queries will be optimized based on the engine that they're going to be running on top of. Of course, there's a number of techniques like the use of material views to make sure that you aggregate data so that the reads can be much quicker. But again, those have to be used with caution. Caching is also quite useful to make sure that we don't always consistently read data from disk, which has a performance impact. And of course, before I move on to monitoring and management, I think the utilization of indexes is quite key because it creates a path on how to access data on the different storage systems, and that improves the efficiency of retrieving data. Now we're going to move over now to the monitoring and management processes for data quality. Data quality is an ongoing process, and therefore you have to set up certain processes to make sure that on a continuous basis, you are ensuring the quality of your data. Defining data quality standards, for examples, and you have to define in your organization and your function which ones are most pertinent and most important to you. It could be accuracy, completeness, consistency, timeliness, and reliability, but the organization would define which data quality standards are applicable to the organization and their processes. Data profiling as a process is quite important because it helps us to analyze our data structures, content, and relationships. And this is where you will pick up errors if they do exist, and you'll have opportunities to actually also rectify them through your different processes like data cleaning. Now, data quality metrics are also important because you have to measure how you are doing based on the standards that you have defined as an organization. And there's going to be continuous data quality assessment. There are a number of tools that are available to assist in the market, utilize tools to assist with managing data. And of course, data governance is also going to be key when we talk about improving data quality. And this is where ultimately all the policies, procedures, and accountability for maintaining high quality data is defined. And again, we see that popping up again, metadata. Metadata is very important. It assists in a number of ways as far as understanding your data, understanding its complexity, and quality considerations that you need to put in place, improve as well. And of course, training has to always be happening on a continuous basis to ensure that the people in the organization understand with absolute certainty what data quality is, why is it important, and how does it affect the business. This could also include exercises where you assign costs to poor data quality? What kind of impact would it have? And that would drive home to the people who are interacting with data, whether they're capturing or using it for analysis, or are the custodians of the data management process, to ensure that they understand the importance of data quality and how it actually assists in driving efficiencies, optimizing processes, and ultimately assisting in growing the business. Last but not least, effective communication and education of data within an organization are crucial for the development of data-driven cultures and the maximization of the value of data assets. It is essential to convey complex data concepts in a clear manner and empower employees with data literacy skills to achieve success. I've mentioned a few items here as an example. Again, not exhaustive, but ones that I found to be key. Establishing clear communication channels. These may include enterprise reporting or dashboards. It could use using collaboration platforms where information is shared about data, information about how data is utilized, information about the impact of data, and also an opportunity for people to actually access data is going to be very key. Also, data literacy programs. Implementing data literacy programs will educate employees at all levels about the basics of data, how to interpret it, how to interact with it, understand its fundamental structures, and ultimately how to utilize it. In my experience, when people are not familiar with data, that is, they don't have literacy training, they usually do not interact with the data. But the moment people get an understanding of what data is, they are usually more curious and more questions actually spring up. And they are usually quite interesting questions. Storytelling with data. Creating a narrative about data. Humans enjoy stories. And creating a narrative explains the whole process and conveys it in a way that is understandable, and people can actually understand what the data is doing and how they can actually use it. It is going to be very important to make sure that you encourage the use of storytelling techniques within the organization. And then, of course, a more culture-focused point that is encouraging questions and curiosity, where you foster a culture where people can ask questions without any fear. It is going to be quite critical in driving data as an asset, where people can interact, whether they are technical or non-technical, but be able to interact and ask questions about data. And then, of course, establishing or having data champions and advocates, identifying people within the organization which will ultimately drive the conversation about data at all levels between experts and non-experts is going to be quite key as far as making sure that your data management process is successful. Thank you. I think that brings us to the end of our session today.
Thank you, Babalo. This was a very, very interesting and I think in-depth session. I've seen a lot of people reacting very positively to your content. And I really liked it because it really went beyond the basics. And I think that everyone who was listening with me today can agree that there were quite a lot of new learning points, especially around the measures of data quality, the process that you explained. So I thought it was a very, very informative session. We also received some questions along the way. So for everyone who's listening live and would still like to ask questions, you still have a few minutes to do so. But in the meantime, I'm already going to moderate some of the questions that we received. And the first one is kind of diving right away into the depth. And the question is, does data masking in organizations form part of data confidentiality or data privacy? What's your view on this?
I think, as mentioned, that data confidentiality is actually quite broad and it includes PPI as an example. And data privacy is more focused on the individual as far as the data is concerned. So I think it basically applies to both to a certain extent, because when you are masking data, you are making sure that sensitive data does not reach the wrong eyes, right? So that could form part of confidentiality, because when you talk about confidentiality, you could be looking at financial data as an example. So you could mask credit cards, right? You could mask identity numbers as an example. And at the same time, you could also mask data that is more focused on individuals' privacy, that is information that is personally identifying. So I think as far as that is concerned, it's actually cross-border. It affects both. It's one and the same thing, I think. Yeah.
Absolutely. I tend to agree with you there in the sense that it does have a very clear intersection between those two different domains. Good. Very, very good. Another quick question is, and again, we're moving straight away into the some more in-depth questions. Next question is, are there data validating or analysis software in the market besides AI penetration and viability in this respect? So I think the question is primarily whether you're familiar with any data validating software that could do this job of data management as you explained.
A number of softwares that exist. And I think what is important to actually put out is that just to manage expectations, there is no one tool that can cover all the aspects related to data management and data quality. What I've seen in my experience is that you utilize certain tools that have strengths in certain areas, right? So you are probably going to use a number of tools for that. But there are definitely tools that assist with data validation. For instance, ETL tools, which are quite numerous, where you can actually make sure that before you write data into a database, it is validated. And if it does not meet the validation rules, it's basically rejected and needs to be corrected. And following that, you also have to follow on with sort of error handling and correction processes to make sure that if there's an error, as an example, if a user is inserting data via an application and there's an error, that they get guidance onto how to actually correct that. So there are a number of tools that do exist for the purposes of data validation.
Perfect. Good. Then I have one more. Let's keep it at one more. I see another couple of questions coming in, but for the sake of time, last key question is, what are the primary considerations for selecting suitable data storage solutions for an organization's need?
Understand your data. So I think that's the key thing is before you actually invest in any storage system is to first understand the characteristics of your data. What kind of data are you dealing with? Depending on that, if you're looking at more structured data, of course, you can look at relational databases as an example. You can look at NoSQL databases if you're looking at data that is more semi-structured to unstructured. So the choice of which system to actually utilize will depend on how your data is. So you have to understand your data, understand your business processes, but ultimately also understand how it's going to be utilized.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Babalo. I think that those are some very, very wise words to end this webinar with. Understand your data. That's ultimately what it's all about in terms of data management. Before we say goodbye, obviously you are hosting this webinar. What if people want to learn more around the courses that you provide? Where should they be going?
Okay, so if people would like to reach out, they can always go to our website, which is www.kineteek.com, and they'll find extensive information on how to contact us. They can always as well connect directly with me on LinkedIn. Send a message, and I will respond, and we can set up conversations if required. I am quite keen on meeting people and chatting with them because I also get to learn a lot as well through them. So yeah, those are the primary channels that they can utilize to contact me. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Babalo. So I think I speak on behalf of everyone if I say that this was a truly informative webinar in which we learned a lot. So thank you so much for taking the time and effort to share your knowledge today. I'm happy to invite you back again anytime soon, because I thought this was an excellent webinar and which was very, very informative. And for everyone who was listening with us live, thanks for taking the time to spend an hour with us and learn something more around data management in this case. Keep a look at our schedule for any of the other upcoming webinar sessions. And I hope to see you again soon in one of our next webinars. Thanks again, Babalo, for your time. And we're going to close the session now.
Thank you. Bye.